Hi, it's Lippy. I'm a shamanic healer, and in this video, I would like to speak to you about how we are narcissistically abused by society and how this abuse actually works to create and to sustain narcissism in this world. Now, what is narcissism? I'm sure that a lot of you who are watching this video already have an experience of narcissism, and I can see that there are lots and lots of videos on YouTube around this topic. I myself have watched a lot of videos because I was at the receiving end of narcissistic abuse for more than 30 years, and it took me a long time to figure out what was really going on with me. And I have to say that it's good that there's all this information out there today about narcissism, but briefly I'm going to cover what narcissism is before I begin with the work that society does to actually abuse us narcissistically and to create conditions of narcissism within us. So if you go by the DSM, that is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is used by clinicians, psychiatrists, psychologists, and it is the definitive work on psychiatric disorders and illnesses. If you go by the definition in the DSM, then the narcissistic personality disorder is defined by 7 elements, 7 aspects that would point in the direction to someone having this disorder. Now, those 7 aspects are too detailed to get into in this video because I would rather skip to the main topic, but just to run through a quick sort of summary of what they are. Basically, they define narcissism or a narcissistic disorder, narcissistic personality disorder person as someone who has excessive self admiration to the extent that they will often ride over others to get what they want. They seem to have a very powerful sense of entitlement. They have what we call delusions of grandeur, that is, they have delusions of ultimate power, ultimate success, ultimate wealth, even when those things are not really in existence, or they're not things that they have really worked to achieve by themselves. And fundamentally, these are people who need huge amounts of attention from others, a term that has been unofficially now called narcissistic supply. And they're basically energy vampires, so they will suck the energy right out of their victims in the process of trying to gain this narcissistic supply. Now, the DSM, of course, is an official manual that's out there. It's something that most statisticians and psychologists are using to diagnose these kind of disorders. But in my experience, I have found that there is also a lot of covert narcissism, and the narcissism that's referred to in this manual is more of an overt kind. Oh, sorry, I wasn't sure if the video was on and working. It is more of the overt kind, and I've experienced a lot of overt and covert narcissism. And the covert narcissism is actually the worst, because at least with overt narcissism it's quite obvious, but with covert narcissism it's very, very insidious. And I today would like to share with you the overt and covert narcissism that I see in society itself. Now, I work with people from all over the world in my practice, and I have seen that in most societies, I don't claim that I have encountered each and every society on this planet. I haven't. And I also am aware that there are societies which operate very differently from the mainstream. I'm not referring to those. I'm referring to the run-of-the-mill standard society and how it operates. And I have seen with my clients, no matter what country they come from, there is a tendency that they have to either rebel against or try to fit in with the social norms of their culture. And of course, the norms and cultures differ in every place. But what I have observed is that there tends to be a few things which are pretty much the norm in most places in the world. And society wants us to toe the line around these things. And the first thing that I have noticed is this excessive need or excessive focus on outer achievement. Now, there's nothing wrong with being successful. There's nothing wrong with getting out in the world and becoming the best that you want to be, or achieving something, achieving great heights. Nothing wrong with that. But when it is done to the excess that we become so out of focus that we forget our soul, we forget our true leanings, then it can be said to be detrimental. And I have seen this in my clients who have suffered because of this. They've suffered because it's so abusive to have this constant pressure of outer success, and there seem to be very rigid definitions of what is success, what is beauty, how much money you should have, what kind of partner you should have, what kind of house you should live in. And if you don't fit in with the norm, the social norm of this, there is a lot of shaming, there is a lot of sort of scapegoating, there's a lot of put downs that the individual is subjected to. The second thing that I have noticed this is prevalent in most societies all over the world, is the shaming and suppression of true feelings. Now, I have to say that this is also an element of the worldwide patriarchal culture, which values machismo and outer displays of so-called strength and courage, while completely ignoring the inner world of feelings and of emotions, especially if those feelings and emotions are considered unacceptable in some way. So in many societies, it's not very acceptable for men to show sadness or grief or cry or have these kind of softer emotions, if I may call them that. Whereas for women, it is not considered very acceptable to show excessive anger, to be rageful, to express their feelings of injustice. And this again I have seen to be prevalent in many parts of the world. And what ends up happening is, as a result of this social conditioning, and I don't just call it conditioning, to me this is a form of abuse. You have a whole generation of parents who then are they want to socialize their child. So what does socialization mean? It means that they want to bring up their child in a way that will fit in with what society wants. And if what society wants is a robot, and I say robot because this is somebody who basically is automatically functioning with this remote control over their head, rather than functioning from a deeper space, functioning from a soulful space. And it's so damaging and so harmful to our soul selves to have our feelings suppressed in this way. The third thing that I have found is the amount of socially approved gaslighting that is used by society to keep people in their place and to keep them sort of away from what is going on. Now, if you are familiar with narcissistic abuse, I'm sure you've heard of the term gaslighting, because gaslighting is supposed to be the narcissist's ultimate weapon, and it is a tool that is used to prevent the victim from leaving the situation, from leaving the abusive situation. And this is done very insidiously by basically making the victim question what is real. If, for example, you're being narcissistically abused and you feel that something is wrong and this doesn't feel right, and what that person said to me was, they said it was a joke, but actually it was a put down, and I'm going to confront them with this. And you go up to the person and you say like, hey, that joke that you cracked with me, it sort of was a bit demeaning. And gaslighting is when that person turns around and completely negates what you're feeling and your perception of the situation, and they turn around and say, "What? I never meant it that way. I wasn't trying to be hurtful. Come on, it's just a joke." Now, this happens on both an individual and a social level. So we have entire governments gaslighting us, telling us that what we saw or what we perceived to happen never really happened, and that it's all in our head, it's all just our imagination. I have seen this time and again, even in my own country. I have seen people coming to power, getting elected to power, despite the fact that they have criminal records. And I'm surprised, I was really surprised to see that people I knew who were very well educated and have a lot of exposure were actually voting for these people. And when I asked them why, I said, "That guy has a criminal record, like, why are you voting for him?" And they were like, "Well, it was never really proven because he never really went to jail, and look at all the progress that he's promising." And this is a terrible gaslighting which happens on a larger scale, and it is actually jeopardizing the lives of people because it's putting some very dangerous people into power. The number fourth item on my list is double binds. And what are double binds? Again, double binds are a very popular tool used by narcissists. One of the tactics used by narcissists in the process of narcissistic abuse. And basically, double binds are when you get two almost opposite sets of directions, which ensure that you fail at what you're setting out to do, because you can never win with a double bind. Now, on an individual level, it may be, I see women get a lot of double binds socially, and the double bind that women get very commonly in a lot of societies is where they're expected to be sexy and beautiful, but not too sexy and not too beautiful. They're expected to excel in the workplace, and at the same time they're expected to take care of the home. I know this happens here in my country, and it's an impossible situation in which you can't win, because it's like you're being pulled in two different directions, and it completely destroys your focus, it completely destroys your self-confidence, because when you're in a situation where you are exposed to double binds, you land up with something that we call learned helplessness from constantly failing to live up to the standards of the double bind. Society also has double binds that I have seen in some very interesting ways, and I actually use the word sandwich to describe a double bind, because that's what happens to you. You literally are a piece of meat or vegetable or salad stuck between two loaves of bread, and you can't go anywhere. It's like you're being eaten. And I have two binds that I've noticed happen very consistently in society, and I call one the smoker sandwich and the other one the weight loss sandwich. So the smoker sandwich is this. First, we were told that this is like when people started smoking commercially and cigarettes became available commercially. Believe it or not, we were told that cigarettes were good for us. There were actually doctors who would recommend cigarettes. I'm talking about 50 years ago, because they said that it calms you down, it relaxes you. When the medical world realized that cigarettes were actually very harmful for you, they changed they did a 360-degree turn, and they changed their whole message around cigarettes. And it was like, oh my God, cigarettes are bad, they're terrible, and they will make you sick, they will cause cancer. But most of the time you get bombarded with these messages to not smoke, that is bad for you. And today many governments actually put horrendous pictures of throat cancer and oral cancer on cigarette packets, so it scares the hell out of someone who's a smoker. But on the other hand, you're also getting this message that's been there from many years of conditioning, that smoking is cool. Once upon a time smoking was considered good for you, and we're still sort of carrying that idea very deeply subconsciously, but we're still carrying that idea. And what do you have in the end is what I call the smoker sandwich. So you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. If you smoke, you're literally like an outcast, you're a pariah, walk into a restaurant and there's a special section for you and people look at you funny because you're smoking. If you want to give up, it's very, very difficult because most of the ways in which they try to make you quit smoking don't work. And at the same time, you're also being bombarded with this message somewhere subconsciously that from another time that smoking is cool, it's good for you, etc., etc. The weight loss sandwich is another one, and I have been a victim of this sandwich personally, because when you are fine, like you're maybe either skinny or not necessarily skinny, but you're just right, your weight is just right for your body, you are told constantly that something is wrong with your body, that if you don't spend 2 hours in the gym and you don't eat a certain diet, oh my god, you're going to be on the next bus to hell and no one's going to want you. And this is especially true in the case of women. The body shaming in society is absolutely horrendous, and so you get out there and you start exercising like a maniac to fit into this crazy, unrealistic weight profile, or you start dieting and you try all these different diets, which most of the time just make you gain all the weight back when you go off the diet. And you're constantly running to lose weight, and what ends up happening in the process of running to lose weight is you often end up gaining more weight. And I have experienced this personally. I used to be my natural body is very skinny, and I unfortunately became a victim of the smoker sandwich, and today weigh almost 30 or 40 kilos more than what my natural body type is. And I remember when I was skinny, there was nothing wrong with my body. I remember I look back at pictures and I was fine, but I would get told off for small things like, oh, there's a little bulge on the stomach, or you've put on a little bit of weight on your thighs. And the body shaming was so frequent. You just go out to a party or to a dinner, and you'd get at least one comment that could really sort of shake you about that you just weren't looking right. And then the next thing is you're dieting and you're exercising, and you're losing weight, you're putting on weight, you're losing weight, you're putting on weight, and the next thing you know, you are actually the way that they had warned you about in the first place. And that's an issue, because sadly obesity or being overweight is so deeply frowned upon in most societies. So that's another kind of sandwich, that's another kind of double wine which you can't win. And it is one of the very insidious ways that society abuses us narcissistically. The fifth way that I have observed is the encouragement of verbal, emotional and psychological abuse. Now it's very interesting because most so-called civilized societies around the world are very clear on their position around physical abuse. So they're very clear that people hitting people is not good and it's violent and it's obviously negative. However, they tend to literally cheer displays of verbal, psychological and emotional abuse. And one of the places that this is most rampant is you see this on reality shows. So I hate reality TV. There just really one or two reality shows that are really good and I watch, and to me everything else is just I find reality TV really boring. But I have sometimes watched some shows just to see what's going on, and it's awful how you will have participants running each other down and being very clearly emotionally abusive to each other. I've seen shows where you have a contest and you have the judges who are literally yelling at or putting down the contestants, and it's all socially endorsed. I remember seeing this one reality show where it was some matchmaking show, and this show was about some matchmaker who basically she helps couples to meet and get together. And this woman was, if one of her clients disagreed with her, she would just start yelling at them. She was actually yelling at these people, and these were adults. These were people who were successful in their own right, and it was so undignified and so awful to watch them being torn down by this woman on TV. And this is it's on TV because people somewhere want to see this. They actually enjoy this kind of drama, but it is nothing to me but just verbal, emotional abuse. And it is very sadly, it goes unrecognized, and it is often endorsed by society, and it is a form of narcissistic abuse. Now, there are many other ways in which society abuses us narcissistically, but as I said, I don't like making very long videos, so if you want to know more about this topic, you can write me a comment or write me a question, and I'd be happy to answer as and when I can. But what I would like to say is that these kind of mechanics or this kind of abuse can cause deep fragmentation within us. And interestingly, it also contributes to narcissism. Now, narcissism, by the way, is what we call a spectrum disorder. And what that means is you have one end of the spectrum where you have somewhat healthy narcissism, and then you have the extreme end of the spectrum where you have severe disorders like narcissistic personality disorder or sociopathy or psychopathy, what they call antisocial personality disorder now. And most people fall somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. Now, the narcissists I'm referring to that are created or born, I don't know. There's a whole debate about it. Is it nature or nurture? And I have a tendency to think it's both. I don't think it's just one thing. And what I have seen is that, let's say you were born with certain tendencies and you're carrying them with you. There is also this way in which society operates, the mechanics of this kind of abuse, which helps to either create or expand on people who may already how would you say, have a tendency towards this disorder. And I have seen in my experience that especially men, if men experience deep trauma or are deeply shamed in their childhood, this is my personal experience, this is not something that I have seen in any manual, but this is my personal experience working with both disordered males and also with being abused by narcissistic men. And one of the ways they come to narcissism is through these social mechanisms, because if they have been abused and they have deep trauma, they often have no safe place to release their trauma, and they can tend to become disordered or come to possess of these narcissistic traits at the very least. Of course, it happens with women as well. There are women narcissists as well, so it's not confined to just one gender, but this is just an observation. And either ways, if you look at the 5 items that I just talked about, you can see how society contributes to this kind of abuse, to this kind of creating this kind of condition within ourselves. I thank you so much for watching this video. It's been a really hard video to shoot today because I've been wanting to get the sea, and it's been raining continuously over here, and today we had some sunshine, but I'm standing under the hot sun and sweating and doing this video. I do hope you will write in with your comments, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you and goodbye.